Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of We Get to Play. We're doing Pugmire this week, and before we set into the game, we're going to talk to Pugmire's creator, Eddy Webb, who's over there.
Hello.
Hello, Eddie. And there is my dog talking in the background. So,
Well, it's appropriate. Your dog has opinions on Pugmire as well.
right? Exactly. I thought about doing we should introduce our dogs, but she is so hard to get up here. You can absolutely introduce your dog whenever you'd like.
That's fair. Maybe a little blurry, but my dog name is Darby. She is right down here, having a snooze.
Oh,
So.
she is so adorable. Awesome. When did you get Darby?
We got her actually about a year ago. It's like I think it was 2 weeks ago was our 1 year adoption anniversary. Yeah, she was a rescue. She was 3 years old at the time, unaltered boxer. She just found wandering the streets, and so we're like, okay, cool. She's the one for us, and it's been in our lives ever since.
Hooray! Adopt.
Yes, absolutely. No, we try to adopt whenever we can because it's so needed.
Absolutely. Well, we've kind of already started this, but tell us more about yourself.
So my name is Eddy Webb. My pronouns are he, him. I am one of the in-house developers at Onyx Path Publishing, but that is as a freelance contractor. So I also do freelance work for lots of other companies, both in the tabletop game sphere and also in the video game sphere. And I do that all through my company called Pugmire, or Pugsteady, the other Pug company. Pugsteady is the company I built to kind of help me with my full-time freelance work. And I've been doing that for close to 8 years now.
Nice.
But before that, I was a part-time freelancer for almost 20, so I've been doing this for quite a while. And yeah, I mean, obviously, Pugmire is something I created. It's the only game that I've worked on that is creator-owned. I was able to work a special relationship with Onyx Path Publishing, so that way, even though they publish it, I still own the rights to it, and I've since done some other Pugmire things unaffiliated with Onyx Path Publishing. But definitely, if it wasn't for them, Pugmire wouldn't be in the world. So I very much appreciative of them, and definitely plan to do lots more through Onyx Path.
Nice. Yeah, they're good people over there.
We try.
Well, so we already met Darby. Do you have any other pets?
No, she's just the one. Prior to that, we had a pug dog run for a moment, as you know, the company name may have implied.
Right.
And then after our last pug passed away around 2017, we actually were without dogs for a couple of years because we weren't sure if we wanted to get another one.
Yeah.
And I don't know, folks who've had dogs before, you either have to have dog continuity, where you get another dog while the first dog is older, so there's no break in it, or you end up with a gap, and it can be really hard to get that next dog going, as it were. And I think that's one of the reasons I think we ended up with Darby is because every time we saw pugs, it just reminded us of our old pugs, and it was just kind of hard still.
Yeah.
But here's a different derpy face we can love. So
totally fair. Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
So yeah, we're the same. There are our four-legged fur children, as or our fur baby.
Absolutely.
And every time we lose one, since I've been with my wife, we've had 3 dogs, and they've been solitary each time because each one is a little grumpy with other dogs. And so it's been really hard to have that continuity you're talking about, and it is extra heartbreaking that time in between. And I'm always like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. You know, I can't go through this heartbreak again. And then sooner or later, I see a dog that's like, this dog needs a home soon. They're doing poorly in the rescue, or they're at a kill shelter, and they're going to be put down the next day or something. And so we're just like, okay, we're just going to rescue them.
We're just gonna foster them for a minute.
Right. And so our last pit bull was Tally, and we fostered her for about 10 minutes before I decided we were adopting her. And Libby was actually about 3 months, which it wasn't anything about her. It was me just saying, no, I absolutely can't go through this heartbreak again. And no one messaged us, no one called us, no one wanted to look at her. And I'm just like, it was meant to be. We loved you the day we brought you back, like we brought you home. So You just stay here with us.
And it's always wild because, like, at least for me, it was, yeah, like I said, can't go through the heartbreak, can't do it again. And then you get a dog, and it's like, why did I wait so long?
Right.
Why did I do this to myself? And of course, then the dog passes away, and you go through the whole cycle again because we have such a special bond with our animals, our pets, but particularly with dogs.
Yeah.
And that's something that I know I really kind of struggled with when I was working on Pugmire initially, was because like I wanted to reflect that and respect that, but also it's is on some level it's a heartbreaking experience
Yeah.
because they will most often pass before you.
Yeah. It's true. And then if they don't, you have to worry about, prior to that, you're worrying about what's going to happen to them if
Right,
you're
yeah.
not there. So, yeah, it's being a dog parent can be rough. But it's so,
Indeed.
pun intended. Yes, I hear you.
Rough.
Hi. She's bored. Do you want to come up and say hi? Hi. Maybe I can, let's see. Can I get the camera before you run away? There she is.
Hello.
That's
Oh, you're
Libby.
sweetie.
She is super camera shy. Every time I want to put her up here, she's just like, no.
Negative. No,
Or I try
don't
and take
want.
her picture with my phone, and she's just like, I know what you're doing. No, go away. Okay, so we actually kind of covered some of the other questions I had next, but just, I guess, kind of solidify the answer of how long have you been in the gaming industry?
So I started. I was making my own games like since the 90s.
Yeah,
Kind of like shoving stuff in a Word document, running for my friends, kind of stuff. My first professional project was in 2001. So I've been doing it pretty much for the entire 21st century. And that first project was a game called Cartoon Action Hour, which was a game emulating 80s action cartoons. So your He-Man, G.I.
that's
Joe,
awesome.
Transformers kind of stuff. Um, and it actually it's still around. The third edition of it came out a few years back, so it's still being published by
Nice.
Spectrum. So it's cool that it's still around and still there. But yeah, since then I did a lot of freelance work here and there. I got to work on things like a lot of strangely licensed stuff. I worked on the Red Dwarf role-playing game. I worked
Nice.
on the WWE role-playing game, Know Your Role. I've worked on the Firefly role-playing game. But I also have a love for White Wolf games, particularly the World of Darkness. And so I submitted for a couple times for White Wolf. And then there was an opportunity to work full time in the office. They were looking for a line developer for Vampire the Requiem at the time. This was 2007. And I submitted. I did not get the job, but Rich Thomas, who was the head of the department at the time, said, actually, we want you to come in because there might be another position you might be a good fit for.
Nice.
And that was what they were calling then the alternative publishing division, which is basically specifically to focus on things like PDF and print on demand because they were still pretty new in 2007.
Right.
And they wanted someone to kind of not only look over that, but also to develop projects that take best advantage of those emerging technologies. So I accepted that, moved to Atlanta, stayed with CCP White Wolf until 2014. Until the late limited World Darkness MMO got canceled, and then we all got let go. So I then went full-time freelance by that point, because in the middle of that, I was still doing freelance work for other companies, keep my hand in, and I had enough contacts and opportunities. I was like, let's see if I can do this full-time for a
Yeah.
while. And then here we are 7 years later, almost 8 years later, and it's like, oh, I guess I can do this thing full-time. So
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know you worked on Requiem. That's really cool.
yeah, I did a couple of adventures early on. But I was developer for the not the Book of Nod, the Testament of Longinus. I put that out there. I did some writing on a few different books, some fiction, a couple books under Rose Bailey. Particularly, I did the Et Sanctum in the Covenant book. So yeah, I mean, I've done bits and pieces. Most of the Chronicles and World Darkness games by
Nice.
this point. There's some I haven't worked on, but I mean, and then in the middle of that also, I was the line developer for Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. When I went from
Cool.
we're going to do a book in 2011 to we're going to do a whole bunch of books for the next 4 or 5 years. I was like,
Right.
well, I guess I'm in charge of this now. So
There's worse things to do.
yeah, no, it was definitely a lot of fun, but it kind of snuck up on me because it was like, well, you worked on this book and we like your work, so could you keep doing vampire books? I was like, sure, I guess.
Nice. Well, since this is a Pugmire show, let's talk about
Mhm,
Pugmire.
sure thing.
So I guess an important question, or rather, actually, why don't you give me your elevator pitch for what Pugmire is?
Okay. What I usually tell people when they come to the convention booth, and they're like, "What is this game?" And basically, I say it's a game set far in the future where humanity has gone, but dogs, cats, and other pets have been left behind. They're uplifted, and they're going through, and the technology they've recovered, they look at it as magic. So it's kind of Lord of the Rings meets Planet of the Apes, but with dogs.
Lord of the Rings meets Planet of the Apes, but with dogs. I love it. That's perfect. So why anthropomorphic fantasy? Why dogs? Why cats? What was your inspiration for that? Was it owning dogs? Was it what started you down that path?
It was kind of two things. One is because I am a gamer of a certain age. I've been gaming since '83, so I've been doing this for quite a while. And I think a lot of gamers, certainly of my generation, I think a lot of Halo gamers have that fantasy of you create your own fantasy world that you run with your friends for decades and have huge binders of lore and knowledge. And I always kind of wanted to do that, but I hate info dumps because a lot of not D&D settings specifically, but classic fantasy settings, usually some form of 50 pages of it. And this king invaded this country at this time. And it's like, I don't care.
Right.
I flunked out of history. I don't want to have to go through fake history to play your game. And so I recognize these two things were inherently at odds with each other. So it's kind of always been in the back of my head of like, it would be nice to do something involving epic fantasy.
Yeah.
But I also really loved that space of sci-fi and fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
specifically things like Thundar the Barbarian or early D&D modules where they have spaceships in the D&D setting,
Yeah.
Gamma World, stuff like that, where it's the kind of post-apocalyptic or even just far future. It's so weird it becomes fantasy again
Uh-huh.
thing. And so that was always in my head. And then I was actually on a walk with my dogs at the time. I had two pugs at the time, Murray and Puck. And it was me in the house by myself. I had the walk on, and my mind was just kind of just going. And I noticed that Puck was also, it's always kind of adventurous and gregarious. He was like, "Hey, you're my friend. I'm gonna go hang out and talk to you." And Murray, because he was much older, he was 10 years old. He was very much kind of stood back, kind of watched, and he wasn't necessarily skittish, but he was definitely a little paying attention because he had, be careful where he stepped and how he walked.
Right.
So the new kid would run up and cause trouble, and then the older pug would be like, "Okay, you just go ahead and do that, and I'll be here." And so I started thinking, like, hey, I'm curious, like, can I map these two like D&D classes? Like, Puck is going out and he's being the bard. He's being cute and charismatic and causing trouble, and everyone kind of loves him, but also is kind of annoyed by him. And then Murray was much more kind of the contemplative wizard. I'm going to take the back of the party and just throw spells and be very squishy over here. And so when we got back, I started just jotting down notes and things like can I make classes out of the AKC breed groups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And initially, it's like this actually works actually really well. I was like, this is surprisingly cohesive. So I just wrote like 4 or 5 pages of kind of off the cuff fiction and notes, just scattershot. And then after a couple months, I went back and started actually digging into it. It's like, this actually still holds up.
Nice.
That was pretty quickly when I got the kind of sci-fi thing of like, this is why dogs are still around, because one of the things I realized, like, if you have a fantasy setting with dogs, who is the kind of cleric god component? And it's like, well, it's people. That's how dog relationship with dogs are. And so, well, obviously, then people needed to be around. And if I wanted to have cultural touchstones that players could recognize, it had to be our world.
Yeah,
So
without
pretty quickly
having
snapped.
pages and pages and pages of lore dump.
Exactly, that's the thing I hate. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, so I want something that feels like that coolness of like there's years of history here, but you don't actually have to know it because it's our history,
Yeah.
or in this case, our future. So that pretty quickly kind of came together too. Okay, this is the far future of our actual Earth. And there's lots of fun because there's the humor that comes with the dogs failing to recognize things that we recognize. Futurama does this a lot too. That kind of, we get the joke, but the people in the moment are actually being very serious about it.
Right.
And I really dug that. And then after I got laid off, one of the things I did was I shopped around to like things like short story anthologies,
Hmm.
because they're great. Because like you can spend a couple of days, knock out a short story, get like $100 or whatever. You do 3 or 4 of them pretty quickly, then you get a nice steady going.
Yeah.
Um, and so they wanted like a fantasy-ish pitch. And so I just pulled off a shelf and I was like, here's this Pugmire thing. And I'm like, yeah, cool, we'll take that. So I wrote up a short story, which is a little different than what the RPG eventually ended up being, but it's still, the meat of it was very much there. And the editors just loved it. And they basically said, when is the RPG going to come out? And I'm like, soon, I guess, now? Because I didn't know I was doing an RPG until just you
Right.
mentioned it. And so I pulled my ideas together and I went to Rich Thomas, who was my boss at White Wolf, had formed Onyx Path. And he was wanting to do more stuff that wasn't just new versions of White Wolf games.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I have an idea. It's for a D&D-ish game. He's like, oh, sure, get it to me. So I wrote up a pitch document. It was 14 pages long. And I was like, here's what I'm thinking about this. And pretty much right away, he was like, let's do this. And I'm like,
Nice.
I wasn't sure. I mean, really, there was some dialing in the tone and whatnot, because I had made it much more bleak and elegiac, because I was like, oh, you do dark horror games. You want a darker horror thing? He's like, no, that will ruin this. Make it, bring the humor out, make it more fantastical, make it more epic. And so the tone, the humor of it came more to the core. There's still a depth and a sadness there, because I think, like I mentioned earlier, that relationship we have with dogs, there's a bittersweet component to it. And I want to make sure that was still there. But it definitely got a lot lighter and family friendlier, as we went through those initial discussions. But again, the core of it was always there. And initially I was like, here's a short story I wrote. I want to do that, but darker. And he's like, let's take the butt part off of that and go back to, you have something here. Let's just do that. And that's how it started.
So, Pugmire's built off of 5th edition D&D.
Hmm.
So why go off of a 5th edition instead of making your own or choosing something else that has a, SRD or OGL? Is it why?
So that's actually kind of a true story. Originally it was actually based off of 3.5,
Gotcha.
3.5 OGL. Because 5th edition had been announced. Let me phrase that. 5th edition was announced when I was initially developing the game, but there was no. And if those of you remember, the OGL wasn't announced for like a year after 5th
Yeah.
edition came out. It was like, what are you doing with the OGL? And so we went to Kickstarter. There was no announcement about the OGL still. So I'm like, I guess I'm using this. But what I noticed when I did my first initial development work, I was like, I want to do a Dungeons & Dragons base, because the key to Pugmire, which you don't really talk about much, but it's there if you look between the lines, is nostalgia. It's about the distortion you have of nostalgia, remembering the past. So dogs remember humanity being much better than we actually were, whereas cats remember humanity being much worse than we actually were. And so to reflect that, I wanted to use a nostalgic system, a system that a lot of people were comfortable with. But specifically, I wanted to tweak it so it was not the D&D you actually played, but the D&D you remember playing in your head.
Gotcha.
Because, again, I am of a certain age. I remember playing AD&D, and then I went back and read AD&D a few years ago. And it's like, oh no, why did I play this? No, I didn't know any better. But in my head, it was amazing,
Yeah.
right? So I wanted to say, okay, how can I keep the core of what makes D&D compelling, but strip out anything that was useful. So I had already made some stabs in that direction on simplifying and reducing it. And then 5th edition came out, and initially it was like, oh, so this is basically what I wanted to do.
Gotcha.
And then there's that brief moment of like, how do I get 3.5 to do what I want 5e to do
Yeah.
without actually stumbling over those IP markers to make sure that Wizards doesn't sue me. And then in the middle of the Kickstarter, they opened it up, and I was like, oh, thank you. So
Life
I rewrote it.
simplified.
Yes. Because we actually had an early access edition, which is basically kind of a
Awesome.
jump starty thing.
Yeah.
And so people who do have that, it's like the terminology is different and some of the core rules are different because I was like trying to emulate people without actually saying like, how do you say advantage, disadvantage with different words, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then, so when I actually got into being able to develop the game proper, because unlike how we do Kickstarters now at the time, I just said, here's the thing, if it fails, I'm not making this game. It was very much if no one buys into this game doesn't exist.
Right.
Or I'll make one book and that'll be it. And then it did really, really well. So I was like, well, crap, I have to make a game now. And so I started going through the OGL and properly reading it, and I realized there's still some things I wanted to do. And the one thing that I carried from my very first design documents through is that from a games objective, so we're going to go into game design nerdity here, so if anyone else bored by this, skip ahead. But the core game design loop of D&D ultimately is you get a certain amount of equipment and powers, you kill monsters to get loot, and increase your ability score or experience points to go up your level to get better weapons and powers to kill bigger monsters to get more loot and experience points, and that's the cycle, right?
Yeah.
That's what D&D does well, and there's no shame on that. That is a very specific gameplay, and it does that very well. It's refined that process since 1974.
Yeah.
It is a polished dynamic, and I realized for Pugmire that murdering cute animals was not probably the way I wanted to go with this. And so I started looking at things like Redwall and Bone and other kind of family-friendly fantasy comics and novels and films. And I realized that talking to people and running away were actually pretty valuable strategies.
Yeah.
Rats of Nim, a lot of that movie is running away from horrible things. So I took experience points and money just out of the game entirely and threw them out. I was like, I don't want these.
Yeah.
Because if there's no incentive to kill monsters and no easy way or no reason to spend your money because you have no money, then whether I run away from or talk to or fight or kiss or whatever my enemies, I'm still getting my level at the end of the story as long as we're alive. And that was kind of the key change that initially I kind of had to shuffle everything around. The other one is that I cap it at 10th level, and that's for two reasons. The game design reason is that every edition of D&D, I don't care which edition you're talking about, tends to get fuzzy around level 15 to 20.
Yeah.
And 30 and beyond, it's basically unplayable. The game was never really meant to go that long. And there are people who have lots of fun at that level, don't get me wrong, but there is a certain amount of you can murder gods, and that's just how the game is now.
Right. Especially in 5th edition, I've noticed like stats they've nerfed so much because they only go up to 20 so far. It's so simple at that level to just annihilate things that are supposed to be difficult. You're just like steamrolling things. I've done a lot of playtesting for different companies, and it absolutely is a little borked on the high end.
Right, exactly. So I was like, so if I just don't go to the high ends, problem solved. But the other one also is that talking with a lot of friends and pulling up some old kind of research data on D&D that was done in the 90s, the average long-term character tends to be about 15th level. And so if I cut it right below that, then it feels like just as you're getting into the groove of the character's caps out. And I felt like that accurately reflected the experience you have with dogs. Right? It's like, just when you think the dog's very comfortable, you know exactly how the dog works exactly. You're comfortable, you know each other, and then the dog passes away, and then you get a new dog, and get a puppy, and do all this over again. And so I wanted to kind of reflect that. And so like when you hit level 10, you can keep playing. There are optional rules to allow you to keep playing if you want to, because I don't want to stop people from having fun. But the game as designed is 10th level, so I guess I'm making a new character now. And that's the point, is that it's over just a little too soon. Again, that bittersweet nostalgia
Yeah.
dynamic. So yeah, a lot of it was taking what was good, what worked in D&D, making sure that stayed well, and I want to make sure it's recognizably D&D. And then taking out the stuff that got in the way of the key points I wanted to get across with the game.
Yeah. Nice. And so Pugmire is the first book and the second book were dogs, right?
Mhm,
So you have Pirates of Pugmire and you have Pugmire, but then there's Monarchies and Mao, which are
mhm,
cats,
mhm,
and it isn't out yet, but the Squeaks in the Deep covers rats
and mice.
and mice.
Mhm.
Somewhere in there, I feel like is there snakes?
We, lizards and birds were covered in Pirates of Pugmire.
Thank you. I knew they were somewhere in there, and I just forgot.
Yes. Mhm.
Awesome. So why those other creatures? Was it a call from players, or was it something you had always planned on building on once the original Pugmire came out?
It was always kind of the plan,
Okay.
because if I want to reflect a game about dogs, I was trying to draw on somewhat of how dogs actually are, but more importantly, how we believe dogs to act, right? Because part of the dynamic is that the dogs, they have this Church of Man that they worship, and so they try to follow this code of man, which is compiled by what they believe man wants them to do. So obviously, a key part of the game is how we think dogs act.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we put on dogs is the perceived rivalry with cats that they have. So I knew right away that there was going to be cat. And even in the very first short story, they had cat rivals that they, run into, and they're evil cat necromancers and whatnot. And then I realized that, again, my experience with World Darkness, like I kind of want to do a second core game that features
Mm-hmm.
cats, kind of like the vampire, werewolf, mage model.
Yeah.
Let's do a Pugmire, Monarchies and Mal, and whatever model. So as I was designing Pugmire, I was half a mind in what I was going to do for Monarchies of Mal. I had to make sure I didn't design anything in Pugmire that would contradict what I wanted to do with Monarchies of Mal. Certainly, I learned a lot from the experience, and so I refined. So Monarchies of Mal is kind of like a 1.1 version of it. There's a couple
Yeah.
things like I tweaked this a little bit, just kind of tie it in. And there's even a note in there somewhere. It's like, if you want to use these things for Pugmire, go ahead. Um, and then when we did Pirates of Pugmire, it was like I wanted to do a kind of big, in quotes, campaign supplement. They kind of, because 5e had been putting out these big, long adventure paths. And I didn't want to do something that was that big, because, I mean, one thing I've been hearing from friends is that it can be intimidating, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this, you pick up the Descent into Avernus or whatever, and it's like, it's really, there's so much adventure in there, but also I feel like, where do I start? How do I do this? Am I committing to 5 years? What's going on
Right.
here? So I wanted something that felt like that, but was in and out in maybe like 8-10 sessions. And so Pirates of Pugmire was like, okay, I want to do 3 adventure arc effectively, but I had to have all the rules and support for that. And I was like, I'm never going to do a full game about reptiles and birds. So I wanted to kind of be a way to play those characters,
Mm-hmm.
because they're also still pets. They are not in the pantheon of dog cat pets. But I mean, I had rats when I was growing up as well.
Nice.
And I have friends who love their birds. So it's like, I want to make sure that I was still keeping that pet dynamic and the relationships we have with lizards and pets. So I mean, the lizards are snakes and turtles and geckos. These are all very much pet. We're not having alligators or dinosaurs or anything.
Right.
It's very specifically the pet-based lizards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, because it was pirates, I can kind of just jam them in there and say, oh, they're off doing pirate adventures, because of course you're going to have all sorts of different people on pirates, because that's what pirate ships were like. And again, I wanted pop culture pirates. Right? These are characters who looked at pirates through lens of Pirates of the Caribbean was a documentary, as far as they know.
Right.
So clearly that's how pirates work. And so pirate is shorthand for person who goes on the sea and gets to adventures. There's no evil connotation with the word pirate. It's
Yeah.
just that's what you do, because we as a culture have slid towards that definition.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we did that, and that went really well. But one of the things I noticed, because at that point in time, Monarchies of Mal had been out for like a year, I think. And two things happened. One is that Monarchies didn't quite sell as well as Pugmire.
Gotcha.
But two, a lot of people were talking about it and engaging with it as if it were a supplement to Pugmire, which is not bad. But it was meant to be a standalone game. But an event diagram of people, the people who bought Monarchies of Mao for a separate game, people bought Monarchies of Mao and supplements Pugmire, much more on the other side. There's always a thin sliver of people who are like, they want Mao and nothing else. And so I was like, okay, if I want to do Mice and Rats, I don't think a third full core game is going to be the way to go.
Gotcha.
That was my original intention. I was going to do an actual third Mice and Rat
right.
game. So that ended up being Squeaks in the Deep, which is more like Pirates of Pugmire. It's a bigger adventure. It's adventure / setting, because it's my stab at a mega dungeon. Again, I want to get the feel of the mega dungeon without the endless this room's empty, this room's empty, this room's empty, this room's empty stuff. So it's much more, here's a bunch of pieces of cool dungeon encounters you can slap together however you want. And then here's a big adventure that leads from both Pugmire and Mao, depending on which game you want to start with, to lead towards this thing. And then rules for Mice and Rats. So yeah, and again, those are all, with the exception of Birds, all of those were in my head from day one, of things I eventually wanted to release. Birds came out pretty early on, because one thing that happens a lot is, when is this animal coming out for Pugmire?
Yeah.
And I can never answer that question, because if it's not an animal I want to do, I don't want to say, no, your animal's stupid. I don't want to encourage the game. But also, if I do, I can't say yes, because I can't give you a when, because I don't know when the book's going to be out. So it's always like, ha ha ha, and move on. But I do listen to all of that, and there's an interesting intersection of people who have animals as pets. They're not traditionally perceived as pets. And that gets into a muddy area that I have to sometimes kind of navigate. And one of those was rabbits, because that was a stretch goal for Squeaks in the Deep. Rabbits came up a lot in discussion.
Interesting.
And I do know lots of people who keep rabbits as pets. So I'm like, okay, rabbits and hares both as pets. I see where you're coming from. That makes sense. It wasn't quite in the aha moment for me for a while. But then I started thinking about, again, that our relationship to rabbits as symbols, as animals. And the fact that rabbits symbols of luck and fertility and, the tricksters to a degree, like the Bugs Bunnies of the world and whatnot. The Roger Rabbits. And so it's like rabbits have a place in our collective unconscious, if you will. And so I'm like, okay, there is something here. I just have to kind of get to it a little differently. And so now that's in processes with the editing, actually. But I mean, so I'm open to new things, but one thing I wanted to avoid is what I kind of call red wall syndrome. Red wall's great. I mean, I love books, don't get me wrong. But each character is ultimately a different animal, and it gets really dense after a while.
Yeah.
And again, that's a perfectly valid way to structure a setting, but ultimately Pugmire is a game about, really, it's about dogs and cats. And everything else is meant to enhance or amplify that discussion. So I need to keep it in the vein of pets. Like, if a character is an elephant, that's more of an antagonist you run into that shows kind of an oddity of the setting, rather than a player character that stomps through and kind of, you lose the focus of that this is D&D with dogs dynamic. So I have to be careful which ones I add in.
Yeah. So that actually brings up a good point. Do characters in Pugmire still find animals in the setting?
Yes. I use the term uplifted to kind of define between, like, dogs that walk around that are player characters and dogs that stand around. But I've been careful each time to give different words for each. So in the case of dogs, player characters, people players play dogs. But the unuplifted version are canines. And I describe it as Goofy and Pluto, right? They're both dogs. But Goofy talks around and gets in trouble, and Pluto does not talk. But they can both coexist at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Pluto is a canine, Goofy is dog, from that terminology. Same with cats and felines for cats and whatnot. Writers have occasionally mentioned it's frustrating because they're still used to being able to use canine and feline as adjectives to being able to describe characters, and I have to know those have very specific terminology. So it's one of those, like, those words are off the table. You have to find ways around it. Similar with the one that is so funny, it happens to everyone, including me, is hand. Because it's like, on their paws,
Right.
you hands. But also, you don't hand someone something.
Yeah.
So it's like you give it to them instead.
Yeah.
It's like but they have gloves and they have feet. So like there are certain words that become tricky because I have to give each word a very specific meaning to weight it. But yes, there are natural animals. Dogs ride horses. Horses are not one of the uplifted species. So horses are just pretty much horses.
Yeah.
They raise pigs and cattle and all that. So yeah, regular animals still exist. And the overall term is basically animals are characters that do not have human level intelligence and generally walk on their normal amount of legs. People are characters that are more anthropomorphic.
Yeah.
So that's usually the kind of group nouns I use to distinguish between the two.
Makes sense to me. So I know there's spoilers in this question, and so you can completely decide to not answer or give your version of the answer. How would you explain the why of the uplifting? Like, why did these dogs become uplifted and these cats as opposed to the other ones who didn't?
So I actually do cover that a little bit in Pugmire and Mal, but basically is that uh, certain animals were uplifted because they were useful, right? Like uh, say Alsatians or German Shepherds, whatever you want to call them, uplifted to be, if your police dog can give police testimony, that's a valuable thing.
Yeah.
So that's uplifted. Um, if your cat can actually perform security functions around the house at 2 in the morning, as
Yeah.
opposed to knocking shit over, that's useful.
Throwing up in your
Um,
shoes, right?
right, exactly. And also it's a chance to kind of use engineering to breed out certain diseases like tip dysplasia and feline leukemia and whatnot. So that's the next step, and then the third step is that eventually it's going to hit the commercial sector, and people are going to want their pets to be able to talk with them and go out and do stuff with them. So that's why primarily pets have been uplifted, because they're the animals that we have a use for,
Yeah.
whether it's as a tool or as a companion. And so naturally, we're going to put our efforts towards that. Why would we uplift a chinchilla?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really provide any benefit to us directly. So our money and effort's going to go towards things that we already have a relationship with.
Yeah.
So that's the big why.
And you don't want
As to
alligator people running around, really? I
turns
mean,
out, no,
yeah,
I really don't. I've watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I know where that road goes. It is not good for
exactly.
anybody. Um, but that does lead to another point, which is that what actually happens to humans afterwards, that specifically is not discussed. And that's not
Yeah.
it's a spoiler, I'm not telling you. I don't actually have an answer. I've never come up with one. I will never come up with one because A, what happens to your table is always going to be far more interesting than whatever the official answer is.
Yeah.
And B, it doesn't matter.
Totally.
If there is a correct answer to find, player characters will eventually find a reason to find it, and then the game is over. But if there's never a correct answer, they will always be looking for more shit to do.
Yeah. Totally. Makes sense. Well, that was my next question. So let's go on to
Man,
what was your first actual character that you played in Pugmire?
the one I actually played in Pugmire was I made a Saint Bernard's fighter. They're called Guardians, and he was a good dog. He was not very brave, but he was a good dog. He tried very hard. I made a joke, a throwaway line, whereas he wanted to join with the other adventurers because he wanted to prove himself worthy of his father's cask. So eventually he can wear his father's cask around his neck.
That's awesome.
And the guide actually ran with that, and so I went through actually an arc where eventually, my father had died, and I had to go avenge him. And then once I avenged him, I was able to hold his cask in my paws. I'm like, which is, I think, peak Pugmire, where a throwaway joke becomes like a serious point of drama, and that's
Right.
it's a big part of the game. I don't know how many times people have played Pugmire and they've been like, oh wait, there's like a real like serious stuff happening here.
Yeah.
I thought it was just bone jokes, and no, there's also that.
Right.
I remember one time I was playtesting the game early on, and the adventure was basically I wanted to test out this kind of, not PvP, but I wanted to test out non-monster combat. Like, what do you do when you're in a situation where you're around like bandits or whatever? And so basically the premise is pretty cool. A cat gets arrested, and the player characters need to go investigate, find out why the cat was arrested, and bring back evidence one way or the other. And they find out the cat is innocent. So they come back and they have a big long debate with the police dogs, and it was a really cool session.
Nice.
But then afterwards, someone's like, "Did I just play a game about racial profiling?" And I'm like,
You kind of did.
"Kinda,
Yeah.
kinda."
Yeah. And that's awesome because it did, with the cat being innocent, it did, help them to understand that stereotype isn't valid.
Right, and that's one of the things that's been really cool, and I would love to claim credit for this, but it just happens. Um, is that this game has picked up a lot in therapeutic circles. There
Nice.
are a lot of therapists and therapist groups who've been using Pugmire specifically to help people because it works on those levels, right? I knew by design I wanted it to work on 2 levels. I wanted to work on the I'm a Weimaraner with an axe that's inherently cool and funny thing, and also there's a deep, meaningful thing, which goes back to my point about big, long established campaigns. You want that feeling of there's something meaningful and epic and cool and dramatic happening here.
Yeah.
Um, and so I always wanted to work on those 2 levels, but therapeutic settings have found that that's really helpful to help people, like we just mentioned, internalize this information in a way that it's sometimes hard to do when you're using real world examples.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to understand why my white neighbor and my black neighbor are mad at each other, but it's easier to understand why a dog and a cat are mad at each other.
Yeah.
So then you get into the conversation and realize even that's not simple, but now you're already in, and you can start to kind of internalize bits and pieces of why
Yeah.
that institutional racism is a big problem. And again, well, because of course dogs hate cats, because cats are blah 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 blah. And then realizing, oh, that's not okay.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Which is not, it's nothing to do with the character I made, but that was a digression. But again, it's one of the things I love about the game is the fact that it can be both serious and funny at the moment. So the fact that my first character ended up being that way almost by accident is just like, okay, that's peak Pugmire.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll throw in my own little story. I've only played Pugmire. Well, I've played Pugmire once, and then I've played a Pugmire in a Legend Lore game, which was also, if you haven't played Legend Lore yet, or if you haven't seen it, it was also a Kickstarter by Onyx Path. It's coming out early in 2022, I think, or mid.
The preview PDF's already out, so yeah, it's pretty close.
Right? Yeah. I have the PDF. Yes. So I ended up. There were 2 of us that got to play Pugmire characters. One played somebody who was from the Legend Lore setting, and there was another character that was from, I want to say, Forgotten Realms or something like that. But essentially, Legend Lore is, and there'll be a future episode, I'm sure, about Legend Lore. But it's a place that pulls you from your actual place, so you can play yourself, you can play your character, and they're being pulled from that into the setting of Legend Lore. If you ever saw the D&D cartoon from the 80s, that's in my head. That's always how I perceive it.
Or if you're familiar with the anime genre of isekai, it's also very similar.
I haven't seen that one. I'll have to check that out.
Oh yeah, there's a whole genre of anime called isekai. It's things like I've been reincarnated as a slime, stuff like that. But basically, it's the same thing. You get drawn into a fantasy world, and that fantasy world works by various levels of game logic.
Nice. I'll have to look into that.
So yeah, it's the same thing. It's that a real world person is sucked into a fantasy world, and now that's their life, and they have to deal with that.
Nice. So in the Legend Lore game I was playing, I decided to play a pit bull. It wasn't one of my pit bulls because the one that had passed, I wouldn't be able to play a game without crying about. And the one that I have now, I wasn't ready to make her a character, so I was just like, I'm gonna pick somebody else's pit bull that I know and play that one. Well, then she ended up dying like the week of the game.
Oh no!
And so I was just like, I can do this. So I'm playing through, and the funny thing about Pitbull, speaking of stereotypes, is in the book it talks about how old literature and such has been found that pit bulls aren't good dogs. And my character is a cleric of man, and she's just like trying to wrap her brain around this. She's like, how is it that I've put all my whole life into this, speaking of deep topics, and all of a sudden I find out that man didn't think we were good dogs. What's up with that? We are good dogs. And so she's out like trying to chase down this evil neck meouncer that was sending undead into the town, and she gets sucked into legend lore with another a Saint Bernard actually.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of good dog jokes, a lot of you can't eat the chocolate, you can't have certain
Right.
things. But then there was this like there were humans and there were humanoid creatures, there were orcs and elves, and they were like, we've found heaven. We died
Hmm.
and we went to heaven, and now
Oh my
here's this
god.
thing. And then they got to the point. So my character Winnie, she was having an existential crisis because here's man, and they don't understand what happened to her or understand why they don't. She was like, "Why don't you think I'm a good dog?" And they're like, "You're just fine." No, the literature says. And so that whole depth of topic was just super entertaining to play through because one, pit bulls aren't bad dogs.
No,
Um,
no.
and two, like having that spiritual crisis of faith as a character, that was really interesting to play through. Yeah. So it isn't just all bone jokes.
And I love that because I specifically threw that in there because I do have some friends who are also pit bull parents, and I was like, I wanted to make sure that I specifically took a moment because that is such a maligned breed. I was like, okay, I
Yeah.
generally don't try to put too much focus on any one breed specifically, but I was like, this breed needs a moment to make sure that's definitively canonically a point of contention. And
Yeah.
and I think I have it written up so basically it's like there are some of the Staffordshire / pit bull family who are like, no, this is just wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is clearly incorrect and can't be true, and they're getting into fights with me about it. And so I love that you dug into that and really played with it because that means so much to me. It's like that was the
Nice.
whole point, that to
Awesome.
have those kind of hooks to go. I want to use this game as an example to show that these dogs are great,
Yeah.
and this is why they're great.
Nice. What else do I have for you? So what else do you play outside of Pugmire?
I do play right now a lot of D&D Fifth Edition because that's, especially during the pandemic, it was I could buy this thing on Roll20 for $50 and then run it with my friends. So a lot of people are running D&D games. So I'm playing a lot of D&D games.
Yeah.
I was in a 13th Age game for 5 years. That was a load of fun. I ran a Marvel Superheroes game, which was the original 80s TSR version of the game.
Nice.
I found a copy on Facebook Marketplace for like $30. I'm like,
Oh
oh my god, you're
wow.
kidding me! I
Yeah.
had no clue what they had, so I was like, yes, mine. And I ran that, and that game actually aged very well. I'm
I've heard
surprised. It
that.
took a few rules changes you got to tweak, but I mean, it actually works really, really well. And people who never played that game before were getting it within like a game session. So
Nice.
it's, um, but other than that, I mean, like, as a designer, you may run this too. Like, there's this thing of like, sometimes you play a game because it's fun, and sometimes you play games because you have to kind of learn what's new and out there.
Yeah.
So I do play a lot of games in very short sessions. Like I'll play like an hour or two of some games, or I'll have a long talk with a friend about a game they played, or I'll watch actual plays online. So there's lots of games I've played in various ways.
Yeah.
But they're always for, well, I mean, they're fun, but they're also not entirely for fun.
Yeah.
It's just purely for research. So I'll,
Testing and fun.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
research and fun. Yeah.
I try to play games that I wouldn't normally play,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that it helps you get out of your mindset. And there have been some games I found since then that I've found I really enjoy.
Nice.
Like Morkborg I played recently, and I was like, this is way too minimal for I'm not gonna like this, and I really really enjoyed it.
Nice.
I think it's a game that helps with short burst play though. And also, another problem you may recognize is that we have so many talented friends, they're all making games. Like you'd have to find time to play them all.
Right.
I did eventually get to play something I've been playing for years, which is Eclipse Phase.
I haven't
And I
even heard of
really
that
dug
one.
that. Eclipse Phase is it's done by Posthuman Studios. It's a transhumanist sci-fi game,
Okay.
and the main thing is that you can download your brain into what are called morphs, different bodies.
Nice.
So it's kind of altered carbon.
Right.
but also with like a bit of like the expanse in terms of the geopolitics, because it's like different factions of the sphere or the solar system have different political agendas. Because Earth has been nuked like 5 years previously. Earth is
Gotcha.
gone, and you have to kind of figure out what to do now. You're all left with humanity. So it's an interesting political game with some interesting kind of transhumanist aesthetic. It's a little on the crunchy side, which is why I kind of avoided it for a while. But Second
Gotcha.
Mission does clean up a lot of it, and I'm not against a mechanically dense game if it's done well. This one I think is done really well. So
Nice.
yeah, so yeah, I'm playing lots of games.
Awesome. Yes, I have most everything you see behind me is Pathfinder, D&D, and some other stuff, but I
Mm,
have I made a list essentially for this show, not this specific episode, but the reason we're
okay.
doing this is because I have about 130, maybe 35ish different games. Some of those like World of Darkness has
Mhm.
all of the things that fall underneath it, so vampire, werewolf, mage, all of that. But falling under there that I just don't get to play because everyone's playing D&D. So I'm like, I'm
Yep.
going to make a show where we're going to play these things and I get to play them. So I totally understand.
It's a smart idea. Like, I have a whole folder of just like jump starts or quick
Yeah.
starts that people put out that I've been meaning to get to because like it's like someday I want to do something like this where it's like get a group together, we play just for one night, we play this jump start, just get a sense of it. And I have like 30 or 40 of those alone, and
Yeah.
then probably another 100, 200 games like in my download folder of just stuff I got for Drive RPG or comps or whatever. And
Yeah. And there's so much good stuff out there. So
oh yeah, like I just got Coyote and Crow today for my back on
nice.
Kickstarter. Just downloaded. It's like, here's another game, and I don't have time to run.
Yeah, I missed the Kickstarter on that, but I ended up getting their late back
Oh, go
backer kit or whatever. So super
nice.
excited for that. Let's see what else. So if someone's hesitant, we'll go back to Pugmire now. If someone's hesitant
Okay.
about playing Pugmire, what advice could you give them?
Main thing is that there's not really a wrong way to play it. Um, I have seen lots of people have been nice enough to do various kind of actual plays online,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of times I've had fans come in and go, this group's doing it, but they're not using the right rules, or they're using a different canon. And what's the official answer? It's like I, there isn't really a bad way to do it. If you're having fun playing the game, go play it.
Yeah,
That's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do a community content program with Pugmire, so people can, whatever weird, neat things you're doing with it, put it out there. It's not gonna be official, but I mean, put it out there and let other people enjoy it.
totally. Do you want to
Um,
expand on that? What is the community content
oh yeah,
program?
sure. So that is the Canis Minor program. And basically how that works is you can create, we give you art assets and templates that you can use to make your own stuff, very similar to the DM's Guild.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can put it up there and charge whatever you want to, and then a percentage of that will go to Onyx Path and me, and the rest is yours to keep. So you can make money off of Pugmire. You have to use certain assets and logos to make it clear that this is not official material. But we've had people put stuff like different species up, different adventures, even things like 100 different books you would find in a Pokemon library. It's a neat thing that I would probably never make, but it's useful for somebody.
Yeah,
That's awesome. So yeah, and so I mean, I think that's great, and I also, again, I don't like big info dumpy things. So Pugmire is very much a bit like here's Pugmire, here's some stuff around it, and a bunch of blank space. Go.
yeah,
And so definitely kind of don't feel like you have to follow the official story, because I don't even follow the official story in my own games. Just do what you think sounds interesting,
yeah.
and you'll have a good time. That's really what I say. It's not meant to be intimidating.
Nice. So there's a question from Twitter. We'll go ahead and do that one. How
Woo.
easily could you use the Pugmire system for other high fantasy D&D settings? So essentially, if somebody wanted to, this is the way I'm taking the question.
Mm.
If somebody wanted to take their dog character or their cat character and put them into Forgotten Realms or Ravenloft, what would could they just take it
Um,
directly across, or what would the conversion look like?
um, so I think it would work pretty much as is. I think your DM would have to do the same kind of quality check for any kind of community content or third-party stuff, because like it's not going to be balanced quite the same.
Right.
You may have to on the fly adjust a power or something because it's not that designed to port over. But I mean, the thing I would say is that from a design perspective, um, cats are going to be a little squishier. They don't get what I call stamina points, but hit points. They don't get hit points as fast as other races do or species do. But also they have much more access to unusual powers, whereas dogs are a lot hardier, but they're specialists. They tend to do a couple things really, really well. The magic item rules are a bit distinctive. That's one area where you have to be careful about.
Yeah.
But I actually do have a book called Buried Bones, which is available on TTRPG, which is just a lot of my design notes and blogs from the past 6 or 7 years. And in there is a convert, if you want to convert 5e OGL into Pugmire and whatnot.
Nice.
But also the reverse I have found is true. I have people come to me and say that they understood 5e better after playing Pugmire, because Pugmire kind of simplifies a couple of things, and then they're able to then go back and add the complexity back in, but the nuances they're bouncing off of just approaching 5e straight.
Yeah.
And I know like things like the fortune mechanic, which we haven't talked about, but basically it's a way to kind of get rerolls in game. You do bad thing, you screw up, you get fortune in the bowl, you pull fortune out of the bowl to reroll your dice.
Yeah.
But I know like I think one of the actual groups, I don't remember which group was unfortunately. I think it was Devil's Due. Or Devil's Luck, I mean. But they ran a Scarred Lands game, and they just dropped the fortune mechanic in.
Yeah.
I've heard other people say that they've used Pugmire and then just dropped in like their own fantasy worlds instead. So I mean, it works pretty well both ways, but like with any kind of hack, you're going to have to do a certain amount of eyeballing and adjusting things at the table or ahead of time. So it's not going to be 100% seamless, but it's 90-95% there.
Nice. So where can people find Pugmire products?
The easiest way to do that is to go to my website, realmsofpugmire.com, because there is kind of the window into all the different avenues that you can look at. The main thing is obviously the Onyx Path RPG stuff, and there's a page for Pugmire and all the Pugmire support things. There's a page for Mao and all the Mao support things. There are also, through that website, you'll find 2 different anthologies, one for Pugmire and one for Mao, of short stories that we've had written. And then on top of that, I've done some things that are unrelated to Onyx Path specifically. There is, through a company called Earplay, you can find an Alexa app that is basically an interactive Pugmire audio adventure. That has a full cast of professional actors playing through an adventure, so you can get that through Earplay, and that's also through Pugmire.
That's awesome.
Pugmire. I just put up through Choice of Games an interactive Pugmire novel set in the Pirates of Pugmire setting.
Nice.
So you can play dogs that you travel from Pugmire down to Waterdog Port and then go into the seas to chase after Greedy Bow, the cat pirate. And that's, you play it on your phone, but it's like choose your own adventure, but it actually tracks all of your choices and stats. So you can get like achievements for making interesting odd choices, and you take how much you are respected by the dogs versus the cats based on decisions you've made. So it's an amplified choose your own adventure style book. And there's other stuff like, there's merch you can get through Redbubble. There's all sorts of stuff that, and there's stuff I can't even talk about yet that's being worked on. So I mean, there's more coming. But yeah, definitely realmsofpugmire.com is probably the easiest way to find out everything that's going on with Pugmire.
Perfect. I'll put those links in the show notes when it goes up on YouTube. Otherwise, I mean, it's a really easy, if you're watching this live, that's a pretty easy one to remember, realmsofpugmire.com. So about yourself, where else can people find you on the interwebs?
If they want to find out more about me and my work as a whole, I have my personal website, which is pugsteady.com, Pugsteady. You can find me on Twitter at pugsteady, and it's usually tweeting about just various news about what I'm working on. Occasionally, I'll post random stuff about Sherlock Holmes or comic books, but generally it's professional stuff. And then I hang out on Discord a lot these days. In particular, if you go to the Onyx Path Discord, there is a Realms of Pugmire channel in there, so nice. I'm usually hanging out there And also through Onyx Path, I do a weekly podcast called the Onyx Pathcast with my colleagues Dixie Cochran and Matthew Dawkins. And we usually talk about role-playing games. Sometimes we end up talking about movies about snakes and submarines. It just kind of happens. But we've been doing that for several years now, so that's another place if you want to get more of this fun kind of rambly design stuff.
Nice. Excellent. Anything you want to throw in?
No, I mean, I just want to say that I'm flattered and honored that you've chosen Pugmire as your inaugural game to play in this new venture. So I hope everyone is a good dog, and we'll see what happens.
I think everyone will be a good dog, although there will be one cat in the group, so we'll see how that all plays out.
I'm sure the cat will also be a good dog.
We can hope. We can hope. So if you're watching live, stay tuned. We'll be back in a few minutes for the live play of Pugmire here on We Get to Play. If you're watching not live on YouTube later on, thanks for watching. Go follow Eddy on Twitter and check out his stuff on Discord and elsewhere. And if you have ideas, go publish them on Canis. Is it Canis Major or Canis Minor?
Canis Minor.
Minor, which is on Drive-Thru RPG. So they can just head over there and join that. It's on one of the community content programs when you're uploading your stuff. So thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye.